The cold came first. A blue norther rolled over the blackland prairie and set the live oaks hissing, and the road to the east turned to gumbo under 1,000 wagon wheels. Oxen bawled. A little girl rode side saddle on a quilt with a doll pressed to her chest, while her mother walked beside the cart, skirts soaked to the knee, listening for hoofbeats. Someone said Alamo in a voice meant not to carry, and the sound traveled. They had been told it would be quick. Santa Anna would march, the volunteers would meet him, and life would return to fence mending and spring planting. Instead, on a wet March morning in 1836, riders reached the settlements above the Guadalupe with faces like ash and said the mission in San Antonio had fallen after 13 days. A day later came the order from the tall general who had gathered what men he could. Burn Gonzales, leave nothing an enemy might use, fall back. People looked at one another with straw in their hair and smoke on their sleeves and began to load what a family is when it has to fit into a wagon. People joined by 2s and 10s until the road itself seemed to be moving. They came from the bottoms of the Colorado, from the post oaks around Bastrop, from ranches where dogs had never seen so many strangers at once. Men kept to the edges, muskets over shoulders, while women steered wagons and minded the children. The old and the very young rode when there was room. Otherwise they walked, shoes sucking at the mud. The rain settled in and stayed. It found the cracks in every trunk and marched down every collar. The prairie turned into a sea of mud that swallowed a wheel to the hub, then 2. Babies coughed in the night. Measles went from campfire to campfire like a rumor you can't stamp out. Bread went stale, coffee stretched thinner, then vanished. A boy lost his shoes in a bog and limped for 2 days with his toes wrapped in a strip from his mother's hem. A woman taught 3 families how to handle oxen, clicking her tongue the way her husband would have. Behind them, the Mexican columns pressed east, one under the blue banner of the dictator himself, others under hard men who had marched across half a continent. The name Goliad arrived like a knife. No one said much after they heard how the prisoners had been marched out and shot by the riverbank. In the wagons, mothers placed hands on sleeping sons and kept them there, as if touch alone could change fate. Near the Brazos, the line slowed to a standstill. Ferries strained against the current. San Felipe, the tidy capital on its high bank, filled with people who spoke in low voices and counted the loaves on a table with their eyes. The town burned rather than be taken, flame nosing through shingles, smoke folding down the streets like a blanket. When the ferry came, a family crossed with a cow roped behind and a girl who wouldn't let go of the family Bible. On the far side, the mud waited with the patience of a creditor. The government moved too. Papers and ink, a seal, a cradle, and the exhausted men who called themselves a cabinet. Harrisburg flickered and fell. The president and his family took to boats for Galveston Island, that strip of sand and shell where the wind cut clean through fever. Out on the road, people heard these things as if through a wall and only knew the line had to keep moving. Sometimes the army and the refugees braided together. The soldiers were raw-boned and hungry, their faces splotched with measles, their spirits stitched by an oath and a few coarse songs. Once, a steamboat named the Yellowstone puffed up river with powder and hope, and people on the bank cheered as if watching a miracle heave itself past the cottonwoods. Another day, 2 iron-mouthed cannon rattled toward camp, the twin sisters, and children ran alongside, laughing for the first time in weeks at the little thunder sleeping in those black mouths. But most days were the same slow prayer of boots and hooves and wheels. The Trinity ran fat and brown from rain, and men swam horses through with a rope in their teeth, while the women kept the wagons straight. Someone's baby was born on the bank and wrapped in a shirt still warm from its father's back. A sick old man died under a live oak, and was buried with his hat over his face. His daughters pressed the earth smooth with their palms and walked on. Coyotes followed, bold as debt collectors. The dogs kept to the wagons and slept beneath them when they stopped. If there was a sound that marked the scrape, it was not cannon. It was the constant small effort of survival, the creak of leather rubbed with tallow, the pop of a wet log in a fire, the whisper of a mother telling a story that would end in a house they had not seen yet, but would see again. When the rain let up, the prairie smelled of crushed mint and wet earth. Fireflies stitched the dark like an unsteady hand mending a torn hem. People began to talk about what they would plant if they made it back by May, and in the saying, found a reason to keep their feet moving. The enemy went hunting for the army and missed, turned, and struck at the edges instead. A ranch that had watered travelers for years was found ruined, the well choked with broken buckets. A schoolroom sat empty with the primer still open on the last letter learned. And yet the line moved, not because anyone had ordered it to, but because motion itself is a kind of courage. A widow named Sarah yoked her own team and taught herself to drive with blisters bleeding and never asked a man to take the whip. A boy carried a younger child the last mile every evening, setting him down only when the fire was lit. Then the weather changed again. April sun burned through and the mud scabbed over into ruts as hard as iron. A rumor went ahead like a spring wind: camp near the San Jacinto, grass belly high, timber along Buffalo Bayou, a place dry enough to sleep. The people camped a little apart from the soldiers that night, listening to the clack of ramrods and the talk around the picket fires. Someone said 2 words in a voice that made the hair on forearms lift. "Remember Goliad?" And the words found a place to live in every chest. Morning brought smoke from the west, then cannon, then a roar like weather breaking. The sound rolled across the prairie and through the camps where the runaways held their breath. After it came a silence so deep the meadowlarks seemed indecent. News stumbled in on a spent horse. The general had turned the enemy in their bed. The battle had lasted minutes instead of hours. The banner of the dictator was down, the man himself taken. A woman looked at her children and did not smile, not yet. She lifted them into the wagon and said they would go and see what the world looked like now. The road west felt shorter only because they knew it. Chimneys stood like gravestones where houses had been, ash blowing from hearths that would be hearths again. A neighbor's gate, hammered into the shape of a heart by a blacksmith with more artistry than sense, lay in the ditch and was set back on its hinges before sundown. In a field the rows were crooked because the man who plowed them could not wait to finish before he ran to touch his dooryard. At one creek, a child born during the flight touched the water and laughed as if claiming it by right. The Runaway Scrape did not become a story because it was tidy. It became a story because it taught a country what it costs to keep a promise made under a flag. The army did its part at the meadow by the bayou. The people did theirs on the wet roads and the ferry decks, in the rain and the fever and the endless mud. Long after the battle flags were folded, the refugees kept walking in memory, carrying what they could, leaving what they had to, and learning that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply to keep going until home is close enough to smell. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.